Welcome to Why Is This Good? A podcast by the Naples Writers Workshop. I'm Christine, and I'm here with John and Rob. Hey, guys.
Howdy.
Hello.
And this week, it's my turn, and I picked a story, Woodland by Lydia Millet, and I'm going to read a section here in the middle. There was a stable of captive bred animals here, raccoons, skunks, possums, even beavers. I helped to feed, water, and care for them. Fur bearers do live wild on the grounds, but they could be elusive. We had to stage manage since clients were promised they'd see forest creatures. We couldn't leave it up to chance. Some of the animals shared their dens with cockroaches. They didn't seem to mind. It was the beavers I wished Moe could have met. There'd been a family of them in a favorite picture book I'd read to him when he was 6. In it, beavers and rabbits wore clothing and had the power of speech. They went on picnics and played games and said things human children might say. I understood they were children, only with different faces and bodies, but Moe assumed that long ago the animals had spoken. Not chickens or goats, but wild ones. He was hopeful their descendants would be willing to talk also. The only wild animals at the camp were pack rats, coyotes, and vultures. A few times he hovered near the hen house at dusk, waiting for coyotes to approach, planning a conversation. Real wild creatures don't talk, I had to tell him finally. For a while after that, he was annoyed by the picture book. It's all made up, he said bitterly. But soon his bitterness had softened, and he asked for the story again. Moe was a cheerful little boy. He never stayed angry. So I'm currently working on a story of my own that I realized a lot later. I could really lean into this new genre of climate change fiction.
Ecological fiction?
Yeah, well, climate change fiction they're calling Cli-fi, which is cooler. Right? Yeah.
Cool.
I know there's a lot of places that specifically ask for that kind of storytelling.
Yeah, I've kind of noticed this, and this reminds me of what we talked about in the other episode about Cat Person, where it's kind of like, if this is something on people's minds, you could probably really lean in and write something that they don't realize it, but really resonates with them because it's on their mind somehow, regardless of, I guess, your takeaway on it. But Cli-fi, I think, is also kind of a way for someone like me who, when I read good science fiction, I enjoy it, but I don't necessarily always seek it out. It's kind of an easy backdoor way to get me to enjoy that because it really is science fiction. You're imagining, in a lot of cases, a futuristic world that has not yet come to pass. A lot of times in this case, I got the sense kind of on my second read that it is like post-apocalyptic somehow, right? Like something has happened to set humans almost at zero. This wasn't gradual. She talks about having cell phones that will eventually not work anymore and there won't be a way to fix them, but they have them. So it's like, this was like a Noah on the Ark scenario. It feels like there were survivors. So Cli-fi is, like I said, it's a way for me to get into science fiction, and I've been thinking of my own story for this, so I was Googling around for other stories like it, and yeah, it sounds like you guys have probably seen magazines actually asking for it, and boy, if it isn't on my mind. I realized 3 or 4 of my recent story ideas could probably be really heavily molded into something like this, so I wanted to read something that did it well. And sorry, Lydia, I didn't think it was the best story ever, but I thought there were so many things that it did so well, and that's why I just kind of went with it. It wasn't like it packed some wallop for me or I love the writing necessarily, but she built this world so quickly,
thoroughly too.
And that was part of what I didn't like about it was I did feel like a lot of it was sort of telling. But in short fiction, when you do have to build a world this quickly, I mean, some of that's probably necessary. But then she manages to add, this very human thread throughout, which is what the main character feels about her brother, who we find out later has died, and he had some kind of illness, and he was her favorite person, and she ends up kind of being alone in this world and thinking about what he would have done to make everything feel like it was worth living. But I think at its heart, it really is Cli-fi, right? This is all, I think people take a back seat to natural description here for sure. Yeah, so, and if it wasn't clear from the description, or the bit that I read, it's about, in this time, rich people who are longing for the natural world as they remember it, they'll pay to have these safari excursions. Basically, it could be the Midwest or it could be out west, wherever in the United States. Yeah, it sounds like you could literally have this high-end tourist trap one day in Ohio if everything burns to shit, because there will be a section of Ohio that's still really pretty. And these people pay to go see raccoons and cockroaches, which apparently we know the cockroaches are there, but they're paying to see the trash pandas, and right now we take them for granted. So you get this sense that, oh my gosh, this could really happen. That's the best. When you read good sci-fi, that's like my barometer. I'm like, oh my God, I could see that happening. Holy crap, no.
Yeah.
You mentioned the technology that's still extant in this world, and there's right near the beginning, there's this line, meanwhile, home was the screen. It's like, even in this disaster world, they're just tied to their screens. They're tied to their phones and their computers or their iPads or whatever.
It's like, this is what got you here, and you still can't stop using it because it's the only thing that connects you to anything. So yeah, she builds a world extremely thoroughly. This is a pretty short piece, and it's like kind of sparse, and there's not a whole lot that happens in scene, I guess, is kind of why I didn't like thoroughly enjoy it. And she doesn't even really give you this like flat out description of Woodland, as a destination. You just kind of like realize what she's talking about, but you do fill in the blanks as you're reading. And like I said, a story like this is usually on the top of mind for people at the time that it's being read. So you do fill in the blanks. You've imagined some version of this, and then it all comes to life so quickly. It reminds me of probably the only like novel length thing that I've read about the apocalypse is The Road by Cormac McCarthy, and then the movie. It's just so sad, and it feels lonely. Like this piece feels lonely. I think that's also, I would wager you'll see that a lot in Cli-fi. That kind of tone.
Yeah, absolutely, because it's called a climate disaster, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's disaster fiction, right?
Right, and humans were at fault.
I mean, the thing I wrote at the top of after I read this was place and character, because it establishes place, and that place kind of defines her character.
Right, yeah.
She becomes a reflection of the place, kind of that kind of lingering. She actually describes some of the stuff that's there as ghosts.
Yes.
Ghosts of trees, and her parents become ghosts, and so she's kind of just a ghost that's floating in this landscape.
Yeah, even at the end they abandon Woodland. They don't opt to live together, these leftover people. They all go their separate ways and meet up once a month to like trade goods. There's this weird loneliness there too, where they don't really even understand the point anymore of associating with other humans. There's no pleasure in it anymore. Yeah, everyone's alone.
There's even a line, I realized place was all there was.
Yeah, I didn't get that the first time. I was really confused by that line. It just like felt flat, and then I read it a couple more times. I was like, oh, wow. That's actually really powerful.
It's a thesis statement in here.
Yeah. There's no future. There's no hopes or dreams or people you love or care about. It's just, where are you in the world physically? I think, and you get the sense too when you talk about her character that in any other time and place, in any other world, she would be a completely different character. She loves her brother. She's smart. You can tell she's ambitious. Even in what seems like the end times or a really bleak time, she's seeking out this opportunity for herself that she's excited about. Like she's managed to be hopeful about something and sort of resilient that way.
It makes me think, this is gonna, as a downer, but I have twin 3-year-olds at home, and they're carefree, they're happy, but then you hear about the 3-year-olds in Syria who walk across the desert to escape war.
Right.
And it's like the difference between them is not much except for their environment. Right. They're just a human being. In my house, they get to, watch Daniel Tiger, and in Syria, they have to flee bombs and bullets.
Right. It's the difference between your children ending up like this main character or like a happy-go-lucky human adult. Yeah, it's terrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that place is, what was the line again? Place is what?
Place was all there was.
Yeah, you can really, that's for sure. Yeah, the story is just so consumed with the setting. It's like, I don't even like imagine characters almost.
Yeah, and one of my takeaways was, like I said, I didn't read this and think, wow, I love this story so much. I mean, I do, I really like it, but I didn't pick it because I felt something about the writing itself necessarily, but then I kind of realized afterwards that at least what she's doing here, and I haven't read her other stuff yet, it sounds like she does write about this a lot. She works as a writer and an editor at the Center for Biological Diversity. So I don't know that she's a scientist or whatever, but is obviously around this kind of stuff and has more of a grasp on it than the average person. But
the organization is dedicated to fighting climate change and species extinction.
Yes.
Yeah.
So she's immersed in this and then obviously lending her creative talents to it. But I realized by the end that whether or not it's her tone throughout all of her works, this kind of separate distance that you feel from the character, like it feels cold and barren, but it's reflective of the setting. And so even though I didn't warm to the writing, I don't think we were supposed to. I think we were supposed to like regard this at a distance. Like I said, and Cormac McCarthy's The Road, that's how you feel. Like, they come across other people, but there's something to be feared and you move on really quickly. It's like you don't even want to get too close. And I feel like we aren't really allowed to get too close to anyone else in the story but the brother who's dead because she's so alone.
I like the way that was revealed. There's where is this? There's a
it's like when it says that he'll always be a boy.
Before that, earlier on, she's talking to him as I didn't want to have to say, "Don't cry, you tender-hearted boy. Terrible but lovely." And then it jumps to there's a break and it says Woodland is a remote stretch of country 20 miles, and then we're there. We're in the future, and he's died in between those two moments in the story, but we don't find out about that for there's another page or so. It says, "And Moe wasn't with me to protect. My posting had come too late for him." But she doesn't explain what happened there.
No.
So it's kind of an interesting way of revealing that he has died.
Right. And I don't like that kind of stuff. I'm like, if she knows he's dead, we should know he's dead because then everything will kind of make sense in context. But you did pretty quickly get the sense that even if you didn't guess that he was dead, you knew that he wasn't here. Like she was talking about him in this kind of like nostalgic way.
As of everything else, right? And it's like everything that's been lost, including him.
And by the end, I love the ending too. So the section that I read talks about how he always hoped that he could talk to animals, and that kind of got crushed. But it seems like something people in a couple hundred years who've never seen animals could realistically think.
Jeez, I hope not.
Yeah, it was just terrible. And then at the end, she's like, I'm just going to read it. I don't care if it's you know what? Read it yourselves. But she says at the end, maybe with all this time on your hands, you would have learned their language. I say to my little brother, maybe they would have spoken to you after all. It's just, I don't know what the literary critics would say, but if you really like interpret it, it's almost as if maybe he could have fixed something, right? Maybe just by being around, he could have fixed everything, at least in her world, right?
He kind of embodies her hope, and he's died, and she doesn't have hope anymore, but she has to return to his memory to just find the lingering glimmers of hope that, propel her forward. Even when there's a limping and very thin black bear that appears, and she's like, is that my brother? No, it can't be. She's always has him in the back of her mind.
At the very beginning, I underlined this as like the first example of her building this world for us. But in like the third paragraph there, it says, the marshy springs at the camp were mostly flats of cracked mud. So you're getting a sense of the scenery. And then it says, so the largest body of water I had ever seen was our rainwater tank. And I knew this was Cli-fi, but by then you realize that she's not saying, I don't live near the ocean. You're getting put in that like, the world is a desert.
Yeah.
And then where we lived, everything was brown. She still hasn't like fully laid out like the rules of this world, but if you're paying attention, you're picking up on this. And I wanted nothing more than to go where trees lived and water flowed, which nowadays seems so simple. I mean, we can even still go to these engineered parks, right? If we want to get that, that's like why parks exist. And then when she starts actually building the rules of the world specifically for us, she talks about we could use the camp shared console from time to time, but children were low on the list. So we had little to do after our tasks were completed, but dig for trade. And so you realize that they live in these camps, and then she refers to other places as citadels. So these like separate fortified groups where people don't want to interact, like don't come in and we won't bother you. And then at her camp, they're digging through the landfill past all these bizarre artifacts, one of which is like a coffee bean grinder, which I hope the future has coffee. That's so
drinks?
Sad. Yeah. She calls it a power,
an energy drink. They ground beans for an energy drink.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly.
I hesitated on that. I was like, what?
Yeah. Well, like words like that are just great because so she's taken it a step further than this character having been around in the before and the after, right? This is a character that was like born in the after and can't even fathom what the coffee was. And you have to take that leap as like the writer to be in that person's head, right? You have to know that they wouldn't know what coffee was. So those are like the acrobatics you're doing when you're creating this world, but it's cool to see them play out like that.
Yeah, it's always cool to read something described in a way that's alien. I don't know the book. Jenny told me this and it's lingered with me for 20 something years now. But she told me about this book she read wherein an alien creature was watching someone eat an orange, and the way it was described, I didn't read the book, she was just describing it, but the way it was described was where you're ripping open that thing and then eating it and spitting out its children, right?
Oh, God.
Because the seeds, we spit out the seeds when we eat an orange.
Yeah, terrific.
But
for the orange.
That's the next generation generation of oranges.
Oh, God.
Just that alien perspective on things is always very compelling. You know,
Right.
It makes you think about things in a new way.
It's all it takes to make something look gross or
Right.
horrible or funny.
Yeah.
It's a good trick, too, for this kind of sci-fi futuristic stuff. You don't want to see it too often. Sometimes it gets... I've read entire stories, I feel like, where it's like an alien crash lands and this is how I'm interpreting it. And it gets old.
Yeah.
20 years. How long have you been married, John?
Married 13 years.
But you've
13
known,
in,
you've
a
known
couple
Jenny
weeks.
for like 20 years.
I've known Jenny for a very long time, yeah.
Oh my God. It's crazy. You seem so young. So, did you guys like this story?
Well, I mean, it was depressing, but yeah, it was well done.
Yeah, I like the world building. I wish there was more characterization, but I think that's kind of like maybe part of the point, or part of, if not the point, then part of maybe like an inherent problem for a genre like this, where people aren't the problem, but it's kind of an interesting challenge. How do you put nature as the main character and then have people react to it? And I think the writing's, I like the writing, and I'm interested in post-apocalyptic stuff too. I would have just wanted more, I don't know if it's more of anything. I just thought the characters were a little flat, and I don't think they have to be for the message to get across.
Yeah, this felt like, I don't know, something that was probably easy for her to write, if that's a nice way of saying it. Not like half-baked, but like she could easily envision this future. She could easily lay out this world. She wove in the thread with the brother, but it could have been
there's just
an outline for a novel or something.
Yeah, there's just not a real story in there.
No, it's kind of a skeleton.
Yeah.
But it's a world.
No, that's why it's hard to...
I know what you mean. There's not a whole lot happening. It's like a whole lot has happened.
Mm-hmm. Which is kind of tough because there is drama in a world like that. And I think that's a challenge for a storyteller, where it's just like, how did this happen? How do I make that part of what happened? Or if these characters are just victims of it, how do you make it dramatic? If it's inherently depressing, because when you think about it, drama itself isn't really depressing. It's not a depressive, it's a stimulant. A drama is something that goes up.
Oh, it's exciting.
Yeah, it's exciting. Like you're building towards something. Someone wants something, they're approaching it. That's like every story ever, right? So when you see something, I think that's why you don't see sad movies playing at Hollywood 20, because they're sad. The arc is like, it's kind of one that's, I don't know if it's trending down necessarily, but it's just, I don't think sadness generally jives with drama that well. I like some sad movies, but or sad stories, but I think there's just like a motor problem there. I think there's like a fuel issue,
One note I made here was I wrote chronological versus emotional for the structure/order of it. Because it's non-chronological in some respects. I hinted at that when I was talking about Moe and how jumped forward in time and then we go back to see Moe and scene and stuff. And I didn't really map it out, but kind of my first impression thinking about it now is we set up in the beginning her kind of desire to go be a custodian of this place, Woodland. Then she gets to be there. Then that place falls apart and then she's left as like a ghost of that place, kind of lingering there. And maybe it's not a, in the workshop, I always define drama as the interaction of human intentions. It's not a drama in that sense because it's not her intentions going against someone else's intentions. It's her intentions to find a better life going against just this world.
Yeah, the circumstance.
Kind of, and her emotional kind of hopefulness in the beginning, even though there's not a lot of hope there because she does wear that hat to keep her skin nice so that she could be chosen for this role. And then it just slips away kind of with Moe. So maybe the structure is more, less a drama of people fighting against each other to achieve something and more a drama of will she make it?
Emotionally.
Emotionally.
Which I think becomes problematic here is because we don't really know her. And so for me to want to know, do I care if she makes it?
No, I think you nailed it because like you said, maybe this is a trap of this kind of writing is that it's going to be sad unless the plot is the same as it would be in all of these others, which is will they survive? Are they going to rebuild?
And do I care?
Yeah.
Well, let's look at what you said earlier, The Road. I haven't read it or seen the movie, but I know enough about it to where I think I've read like the first 2 chapters and I cared. Because why? Because the dad wants his son to live because that's like, you're an animal and that's what you want.
Yeah. So that's what I was going to say with this. I think it's kind of thin, but the thread in this is about the brother and then the bits that I read are what would he think? And that seems to be the payoff of this story. That seems to be as much of an arc as we're going to get. Like the story's kind of thin, but I think you're going to have to start introducing stuff like that with this kind of genre. You're going to have to introduce what all sci-fi has, which is like a human arc. We saw it in the story that John had us read about the computer. How can you have an arc in a world that's never ending and it's all about torture? Well, then the arc becomes less about the suicide, or well, the murder-suicide or attempted murder-suicide, and it becomes more about, will he make it emotionally, and like what's the emotional arc. And in The Road, it's about him wanting his son to survive, but also his own death is imminent, and that's so hard to overcome plot-wise. Like Rob would not go to that movie theater, Hollywood 20, and see that because Road? Well, but like, okay, so you're saying you like the beginning of the book, but there's also...
I will read it. I love the author, and I love the idea of the story. But
it is sad. You nailed it.
There's also something about, I think, sadness in general, where it's like people tell you, don't wallow in your sadness. Well, yes. There's something to that. Sadness is wallowing. It's like still water. It doesn't move.
No, you don't And
I think something
that's why there's stages of grief.
And I think something like The Road, I don't find sad. I find that seems more like a horror movie to me, or a horror story.
Oh, it's so sad.
No, of course there's sadness there, but I think to compare Cormac McCarthy to anybody, never mind this person, is a disservice. That guy's kind of on a different level. And I'm not just saying that because commercially. I just think I'm not alone in saying he has an ability like few do. But I think he's able to compare what he did to this. I think he was able, in the little that I did read, he's kind of a classical storyteller, and she's trying to get too cute for her own good, if I can speak plainly. I think he's almost like a Melville, where you just you start from here. He's so but his writing is spectacular. But she's like, we're here and then we're there. Like, it was confusing for me, and it didn't have to be. Like, you're not Christopher Nolan. You can just introduce if this is a complicated world, introduce it in an uncomplicated way.
Yeah. I do feel like that's how you make sci-fi manageable for sure.
Yeah. Sci-fi is great, but I mean, I would not say this is like necessarily successful sci-fi, and because it has great world building, but it's the kind of the who cares aspect. I mean, great sci-fi is like any other great, like there's great characters.
It's almost like you could argue that Cormac McCarthy for The Road started with the premise of the father-son drama versus the apocalyptic setting.
It did. I've read an interview where I was just looking at my son sleeping. And there you have it, right? You're thinking about your kid.
And he's got the strength of the story then is not in the plot itself.
Right.
It's
like the age-old thing.
Yeah.
Do I care?
Yeah, what you said about sadness being still.
Yeah.
That is, I think that's really that's key, because it doesn't move anywhere.
No, it doesn't want to do anything.
Go anywhere with sadness. You have to do something else,
right,
to get out of the sadness. And that's where a story would occur. It's like, what do you do in the face of sadness? Whereas in this story, we're just sad the most of the time. Yeah, we're just sad.
Which is fine, I guess.
Which is in that story you referenced, I have no mouth, but I must scream. It was a similar kind of resignation. I don't know, kind of not desperation, because that has a little more movement maybe. But what is,
it was futile.
Despair.
It felt,
kind of a despair, kind of a futility maybe, are also maybe still kind of things. And then they had to find an action to accomplish something.
Right.
The
it was
murder
like they had
was
to
the
invent
action. Right?
Yeah, something to make it move from what was a cool concept to a story.
Yeah, exactly. Where like her attempted action seems to be
a revelation,
a little bit of hope, a little bit of maybe I can make something of myself if I go to this place, but then that place just dies under her feet. So we just linger in that sadness longer. You know, it's kind of maybe a tragedy in that way, where just a classical formulation, the hero attempts something and fails, right? So to go back to what you're saying about sadness, I think that might be a really important thing to think about for as writers is what is the emotion that we're accomplishing in the story, and does it have movement? Is it going to draw does it give energy or forward momentum, profluence to what we're doing?
Your word, my better word. Yeah. It reminds me too, John, of something that you talk about a lot when in our workshop, which is when a character, we'll find ourselves struggling to articulate what it is that doesn't work about a certain piece. And then usually I've found that you'll say something like, well, the character in this piece is a victim. Like they aren't making choices. They aren't taking action.
Hey, that was just last week.
Yeah. So that feels almost like a sort of a way to make it like a narrative device, to Rob's point. Like if it is still, if you are stuck in this emotion, it's because you haven't let the character take an action. Because when you talk about, like I said earlier, there's like the stages of grief. There's stages because otherwise grief is just this prolonged place that you live. But the stages are you climbing out of it. And then the arc of the story is you coming out of it. Yeah, you can't, like sad is like crying and crying and crying.
Yeah, there's
and then the story is when you stop crying and you get up and you go brush your teeth. Or
you cry harder.
Yeah, you do something else after that. You can't cry forever. Imagine if you watched a film and someone was literally crying the entire time.
There's that story that, I don't know if I should name her on the podcast, where she was grieving. The character in her story was grieving. And her action was just so minor, but it just opened up a kind of just this hopefulness that she was going to be okay.
I felt that was unfinished, but there was a movement to it already.
Yes. Yeah. There was already something there where it already had that aspect of
legs,
movement.
like it could get up and go.
Because the character took an action.
Yes. Or because, almost like the cat person, you were so close third that even though there was inaction, you were doing a lot of work being in the character's head through it. Like physically, they're just sitting in bed. So my takeaway, obviously, for this is that I'm really into this Cli-fi genre. I think it's the next hot thing. I think it's going to take me to stardom and fame if I can start and finish the story I have in mind by the time I have to submit it next Sunday. And who knows if I will. But I've realized, like I said, that a lot of what I'm thinking about on a daily basis and feeling the urge to write about has in some way related to the fact that I feel a bleakness about our current time and place, specifically as it relates to the natural world.
Mm-hmm.
And if I watch Cormac McCarthy right now, I won't stop crying. Like, it's horrific. So this is a cool new genre if you haven't heard of it, and you should try it. What about you guys?
I would take away I like when we get into stories that we find problems with, because I think that's just as instructive as finding ones we don't. So yeah, I would try to just zero in on character. We've had a couple of past episodes with awesome characters, and these, while flat, if you just pump them up a little bit, your story can go and go and go. So yeah, just characterization. Just who are they? What do they want? And then you're off.
This is like the difference between, we already named it. What's the story that you picked where she's talking the whole time about her lover?
Goodbye and good luck.
Yeah, that is a story almost based entirely on the strength of that character.
Oh yeah, for sure. It's all voice. Yeah, I mean, it's not easy.
No, and yeah. When we talked about it, that one, we were like, don't try this at home.
Yeah, she's a whiz kid.
Yeah, just hope you already have it.
Yeah.
That was a fun takeaway. It's like, just be awesome. Come on.
And if you aren't,
don't do it at home.
So what's your takeaway, John?
The takeaway I kind of wrote down and thought about talking about was just world building. Because one thing that happens in this story is it's not just the world is built up and we get a sense of it. It's the world builds up and evolves. It changes.
It does, yeah.
It continues to be built throughout. And I think you can spend a lot of time building a world. It just is like a static background for something. But if you can get that world to breathe and move and change, it's going to give your piece a lot of room to also do those things, live and grow and breathe. And I want to add to that, based on our conversation, is how setting and the world you built, how it impacts the character. And we talked a lot about how important character is, like what Rob was talking about, of just punching up the characters. So if you're going to build the world and like let it breathe and grow, have your characters grow with it and change with it. And she does do that to some respect in here. Obviously we pointed out some of the shortcomings, but yeah, that would be my takeaway, is just have your world grow and change and build along with your characters.
Cool. Well, thanks guys.
Good night.